Welcome to the next episode of Brandland. I'm Garrett Justice, and today I'm joined by Ashley Murphy, who's the Senior Vice President of Communications at Brown Harris Stevens. Ashley, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for being on the show. We're super excited to have you and dive in to understand your background, a little bit more about Brown Harris Stevens. But before we do, tell us how things are going on the East Coast in New York over there.
They're pretty good. I mean, given considering the situation with the pandemic, things are starting to open back up a little bit. Indoor dining is coming back. Mask mandates are still strong, which I think personally is a good thing. But slowly but surely, there are signs of life creeping back to New York City itself too, which is great.
Love to hear that. Glad to hear. It's exciting, especially, as things start opening up here, as spring weather is right around the corner. So I think we're all excited about that. Well,
absolutely.
Well, tell us a little bit more before we jump in about your background and also about Brown Harris Stevens.
Great. First I'll start with Brown Harris Stevens since I'm a publicist by nature and I'm always pushing my company first. So Brown Harris Stevens is a legacy real estate brokerage. And by that, I mean, it was founded in 1873 in New York City. So it's one of the oldest brokerages in the country, really. And we have a tremendous history of high price sales. We've set records in New York City, Palm Beach, the Hamptons, all over. But we actually just merged recently with our sister company that was Halstead. So now our company is even bigger. We have 2,500 agents in 4 states across 55 offices. So I manage the day-to-day PR for all the agents, all the properties and the executives and the company itself. So it's a big job.
Yeah.
And personally, I come from a news background. I started off as a news producer for CBS or KYW, which is the owned and operated affiliate in Philadelphia. And I loved it. It was a lot. The schedule was a lot. Every snowstorm you have to come in, you're staying there overnight. The work-life balance kind of didn't jive with me. So the next best thing I could figure for myself, since I love storytelling, was to dive into PR. And, candidly, my father is a real estate broker. So I grew up with it. I went to open houses before I could walk. So I know the background. I know what's important to agents. And I kind of carved this interesting career niche for myself that, ended up really working out because I love it.
Well, that's so awesome. I love hearing, about that awesome legacy brand and how do you tap into kind of the history there as well when it comes to storytelling and PR. I think that's like a perfect setting the stage for what we're going to jump into today, but our topic. But before we do, I'm curious, in that transition, that career transition for you going from, kind of the news side to, in-house at a large real estate company, that could be a big change, right? Like what's the biggest learning or surprising thing for you in going through that career transition?
Well, so what's interesting to me is when you're in news, you get inundated with press pitches constantly. And a lot of them are just kind of spam and you gloss over them. And so I learned when I was a producer what caught my attention. And I was able to bring that same kind of knowledge base to Brown Harris Stevens. It doesn't work all the time. I can't say I have 100% accuracy rate, but it does help to have that experience being on the other side of the desk. Because PR or effective PR outreach is a fine balance between pushy and kind of understanding the reciprocal nature of the relationship you have with reporters. But that takes time. Also, I will say I never knew that quotes from people are usually written by their PR executives. I'm, literally thinking they're coming from the CEOs of these major companies, but a lot of planning goes into what is said. And that's something that I learned when I jumped into PR.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, I'm excited to pick your brain today then on this topic of PR, especially, and how it can help companies build a strong brand. I think you have a unique perspective where you've been kind of on both sides of that table. You've been on the news side and now in-house, right? Pitching people who are kind of in former roles that you were in a past life. So again, as we start to jump into this, I think that there are a lot of people who come from a marketing or a creative background who don't fully understand PR. So help us by understanding, the difference, explain the difference between PR and marketing and how they are complementary but different.
Yes. So this is probably, I get asked this a lot. And I'll just start by saying PR is more relationship based. It's a long-term goal. You're not really pushing a product. You're not in sales. You are trying to put the best foot forward of the company and manage and create a reputation that is sustainable. Marketing really is more of a hard sell of the product. It's sales, it's advertising, it's paid dollars. It's kind of pay to play. So there is a difference. Marketing, I will say, they can control their messaging. They'll input versus output is the same. Whereas in PR, you don't have the same level of control at all. You can put a message into the universe, and how it's received, if it's picked up at all, that's not up to you.
Yeah, it's so interesting. So, as you think about PR and the goal of what you're trying to accomplish with PR, how is that similar or different than, traditional marketing in the broadest sense of the word?
It's similar in the sense that I take a lot of my cues from marketing. I say that their messaging is kind of the ethos of the company. They come up with the mission statements. They have that kind of knowledge base. And my job is to kind of take that ball and run with it, because PR adds a third level of credibility that marketing doesn't have by nature, because audiences are smart. They know when you're paying to place something. There's usually a disclaimer on a lot of it. But if you get a third party to kind of say what you're trying to get at for you, that's again, it's a layer of credibility that you cannot buy. So working together in tandem is really important. For example, we just at my company launched a program called Curate, which is home renovation services that we partnered with a company that will front the money. So you can stage your home before you put it on the market and kind of give it a nice facelift. That originated with marketing, but it was my job to kind of take that and get it out into the press and make a bigger news splash. So coming together, we formalized a timeline. I secured an exclusive. And from there, once that hit, marketing was able to put paid social ads, digital ads. We created print ads. We did an entire 360 marketing blitz around this one campaign. And it worked beautifully because we hit every angle.
Yeah, I love that example. So I think you kind of touched on this with that example, but I'm curious if you could help explain a little bit more about how PR and marketing can complement each other, especially when it comes to building the company's brand. What other ways do you partner or complement marketing, to help with that?
So I think neither can exist in a vacuum. Like if your product stinks, you're not going to get great PR. And again, like if your product is amazing, but you don't have anyone to give it attention, you're going to fail. So the two really have to work together. And there's no other way to put it. Real estate, I'll say, is different than most companies because we don't have control over our product. People's homes are their homes. We do have control over our level of service that we provide. So that's something that we really hone in on. And that starts with, marketing itself as a service, how we market properties. So we have to work together in order to make our business viable and functional. Without the paid and the earned media components, it would not be effective at all.
Yeah, that's great. So I'm curious, going back to when you made this transition a few years back, right? Going from the news side to now in-house working there at Brown Harris Stevens. What was that initial transition like with regards to getting to know how to work together with those marketing partners? Was there any education you had to do for them on the side of PR? Was it something that was new or already established in the company? Tell us a little bit more about that experience.
PR had been established before. They've been in business for a long time before I was, born. So they've had PR. But I will say the same questions come up repeatedly, regardless of how long some marketers have been in the business. We do butt heads sometimes because our line of work, they're fundamentally different. So for example, marketers have a certain idea of what they can say to the public, and to them, what they put out is what people read. Whereas with PR, it's not at all the same. They could give me the messaging that they want me to give out, but a reporter doesn't have to take it that way. And, they don't have to take it at all. And that's really hard to drive home with marketers. The other thing is proofing a reporter's work before it goes to print or online. PR, earned media, you don't get that luxury. Whereas in marketing, you get to see the proofs. You've paid for them before they hit print. And that's really hard to understand. PR is kind of this weird netherworld. I say my job is to be like the neck of a reporter and to turn their heads to get our attention rather, or to get their attention. I'll back up. we are, I'm like the neck of a person in PR,
Mhm.
trying to get the reporters to pay attention to us. Like I focus on what they should be looking at and hope that they take our cues and run with it.
No, I love that. So I guess to sum that up, what tips or advice would you give to, anyone else working in PR with how best to work with their marketing partners?
I think you do need to have some education lessons, even if it's like an FAQ, which I have put together before, about what works, what to expect, what not to expect, what can go wrong, because it can. Um, there are just certain controls that PR does not have in place that marketing does, and it will never. And that's the double-edged sword of PR. It's relationships built, and it's a long-term prospect. It's not instant gratification. Whereas marketing, you can put dollars behind something. You know the deadline. It's done. It's paid. Um, in terms of the advertising sector, but not in PR. And I think those two are conflated. I constantly get asked questions. I'm constantly asked to like, can I place an ad so and so, or I said this, can I now retract it? No, you can't. Like that kind of thing. It's an ongoing battle, but once the barriers are broken down with enough education, it finally starts to sink in.
Makes sense. So education on both sides so that marketing partners understand what PR does, what their goals are, and vice versa, the other way around.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, you shared a little bit of an example at the beginning here today, but I'm curious if you have any other examples from your past experience of how PR and marketing have worked really well together for, some sort of purpose or campaign. You shared the example of kind of this new product or service that your company recently launched. You have other examples like that? I'd love to hear about how they work together well there.
Yeah, so I do have plenty of examples, and I'll say that social media is kind of a gray area. It falls under both the purview of PR and marketing, because while you are pushing a service a lot of the time with PR, it's still engaging with journalists and the audience on a more kind of organic level. Um, so I use LinkedIn a lot for my executives or thought leadership pieces. And if I feel like we're not getting the traction that one of our ideas deserves, I will have the executives write something and put it on their LinkedIn, or write something and submit it as an op-ed to a publication. And it's kind of incredible. We did something recently on election day. My CEO decided that she was going to give everyone paid leave to vote in the election, not because she's trying to get anyone to vote one way or the other. She just believes in the fundamental right, and everyone should not worry about having to come into work. So I had been talking to reporters. They were kind of lukewarm on it, and I was like, all right, we're going to do this. You're going to write this for your LinkedIn. We're going to be very strong about it. She put it up, and within an hour we had a story on it because we used very powerful language. It was her idea. She was very impassioned, and it worked. And from there, it went viral. I've had a couple other instances like this in my previous job. The executive I worked with was lamenting the fact that there were no women at the time on that show $1 Million Listing, which is the big hit in real estate. And we wrote an op-ed, placed it, and from there it got picked up by so many publications. Quartz did a whole article featuring it. It was amazing. And I think, again, when marketing takes those cues, they can kind of run with that, and they can put paid dollars behind it on social, or they can create a whole campaign around it. And that kind of brings a brand awareness that, I think it's worth its weight in gold. Your ROI is crazy. Like, you can spend a lot of money, but I think just the traction that you get and the respect that you get and the recognition that you get is worth it.
Yeah, I love those examples. I think those are excellent examples. So, we already talked a little bit about what advice would you have for those in PR working with marketing, but I guess based on those experiences, what advice would you give marketers in how to best work with their PR partners and leverage them for, to get those results, like in some of the examples you just shared?
I just think communication is key. Over communicate your deadlines and your timelines. Collaborate on what assets you plan to use. If I have an exclusive coming up, I'll try my best to get a run date. It's not always guaranteed, and they change it sometimes, but I'll share that right off the bat with marketing, so they can have all the social assets lined up for all of the stakeholders to share at a corporate and then on an individual agent level. And it just makes the PR and marketing blitz last so much longer. There's also an internal communications component. That's another story, but all of these things work together in tandem to create just like a really great effect that gets people really excited and generates a lot of buzz.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Well, this has been excellent. I'm curious, looking forward, based on your background and your expertise, what are the shifts or changes that are currently happening in the PR world that marketers and those in PR should be aware of?
I'd have to say, again, going back to the social media aspect, there are more platforms popping up every day. I myself am a millennial, which is old, I guess, by today's standards. But there's Clubhouse, there's TikTok, there's Facebook, there's just ad nauseum, so many platforms. And I think it's important to come together and figure out how to manage them together, because as I said, it can be a powerful tool to reach audiences directly. Journalists also get a lot of ideas from social media. And if you're not working in tandem, you really lose a lot of the value. So whether it's paid or earned, it almost doesn't matter on social. It's a really crazy Wild West world, and I'll be interested to see where it goes.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I agree. I mean, there's so many big things popping up all the time in that space. And so how can marketers and PR professionals work close together to help, in those channels, leverage them, the ones that make sense for their business? So it'd be fascinating to see.
I agree.
Awesome. Well, Ashley, this has been an excellent conversation. I appreciate you jumping on and helping share your background and also some of these insights on PR and marketing and how they can work better together to build a stronger brand. As our listeners, if there's any of them that have questions for you or want to follow up and connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
They can find me on my LinkedIn. I'm pretty active. I post several times a day. That is my social media platform of choice. There are many to choose from, but I actually get a ton of traction from LinkedIn and engagement. So
I
that's
love
where
it.
I'll be.
I love it. I'm the same as you. That's kind of my platform of choice as well. So we will drop the link to Ashley's LinkedIn on the page. So those of you listening can find it there and connect with her if you'd like to. So Ashley, thanks again for taking the time today. This has been an excellent conversation. Hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.